Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are back on the saddle, back on the wagon. We are going to be answering your questions. So these are questions that I've pulled from our YouTube comments, from our Discord, spanning a wide variety of topics. So hopefully you find them educational and also perhaps entertaining, as you may see as we get along. So without further ado, let's get into it. So these questions are in no particular order. That's sort of how I hauled them out.
Sorted by Phil's whimsy.
Yeah. The first question I have here is, can any optic fit on any Airsoft replica? So this is a question from a random user on YouTube, probably someone who's relatively newer to the Airsoft scene, which is, I think, a fair question, right? I think there's two ways that you can think about this. Like, can any optic physically fit on any Airsoft replica? Number one. And then the other thing is, does any optic fit on any Airsoft replica in terms of looks and vibes and stuff like that? And obviously, we can just talk about the latter just very quickly. The answer is, well, that is up to you and taste. But if you're going for like some certain classic looks, obviously, like there are certain types of AK sights that are meant to be used on an AK. Could you put that sight on an M4 and have some AK users like rolling around in their graves? Like, probably, right? And it could you make it fit and find a way to fit? They're not designed to work on that type of replica and all this kind of stuff. Can you make it work? Yeah, absolutely.
Will it entertain me? Probably.
Yeah, and like, would it be a good look? Like, I mean, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But certainly there are certain types of replicas that, in my opinion, look better on certain types of optics, I should say, that look better on certain types of replicas, my opinion. Right?
I definitely agree. I probably, I mean, funnily, like for all that I've definitely used people's AKs that I borrowed for a game or two with like an AK rail and then like an EOTech on them or something. It always feels a little like aesthetically weird to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and does it work? And I think you're hitting on the second part of this question. But like, just to come back to it, like, does it work? Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, it's Airsoft. Largely, it's a flash and show. Like, we talk about we talk about optics, and we do believe that they're important because they help with target acquisition and all this snap shooting and all this good stuff. Whatever people might say in the comments, they are a useful tool to have. But is it critical that you have the right optic for your particular like? No, you can work around it if that's what you want to do, and also depending on what you have.
And like, right? Ultimately, as long as it functions adequately, a red dot is a red dot is a red dot. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, so there's probably an argument for, or I think anyway, there's a compelling argument for like a higher quality one versus a lower quality one.
Definitely.
Especially if you like play outdoors and you're using like, I mean, the EOTech replicas we both used for ages, washed out so much in even like overcast conditions that they were basically useless.
Yeah.
So like you probably do want to make sure you're using something that's actually a reasonable red dot. But like the aesthetic, like, oh, does this pair well visually is definitely not the same thing as does this work.
Definitely.
In terms of attaching them, like as long as you have a rail and it's designed to go on that rail, you're pretty good. And you can put a rail on most things.
Definitely. And before Matt gets on our case again about talking about optics too much, I think that is a very salient point, especially if you're a beginner, right? Like if you buy an Airsoft replica, if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to upgrade this in the future by maybe putting a replica optic on it, or maybe like a hand stop or like a grip or whatever, does it actually have rail attachment points? Does it have a place where you can physically put an optic? Because if you start off, you're like, what, the coolest gun I think is an MP5A4. Cool. There is no place for you to attach an optic or like an under barrel attachment or whatever stuck. So you need to have a plan for how are you going to get that optic on there. Now, of course, yeah, you can get like MP5s with a rail, but I'm talking about like the classic, look with the, maybe even get that cool if you get that flashlight handguard, the really spiffy one, right? There's no way for you to attach it easily, right? If you get an M14, like a classic M14, there's nowhere for you to attach it sort of just out of the box. Same thing if you decide to go with a Tommy gun, or if you go with a classic AK, or you go with, there's lots of replicas out there that don't have just an easy place for you to just slap on an optic.
And
And
like, if you're putting an optic on your
yeah,
Thompson, I'm gonna have questions for you.
well, yeah, for sure. But I mean, you see some guys running around with like M1 Garands that are like Guccified or what, like fine, whatever, like fill your boots. But for the average, especially beginner airsofter, like you're picking up a replica, you need to think, in my opinion, you need to consider like, am I going to want to upgrade this in terms of the externals? And if that does happen, do I have the know-how? Am I even interested, know-how aside, like, am I interested in figuring out how to put a rail on there so that I can put an optic on there? And if the answer to that question is no, then you may want to consider something that has a rail built in when you pick up your first
I mean,
first replica.
my M16 was just a heat shield one, and like I bought a terrible like screw-in paintball rail that like fitted into the holes on the heat shield just to put a foregrip on, and it worked fine.
Mm-hmm.
There was no mechanical issue with that ever. It just looked hideous.
Yeah.
And like, no surprise, the build that followed it, and really everything I've used since then, it's like, yeah, if it doesn't have a rail I can put a foregrip on, I'm gonna have to think about it seriously.
Yeah.
And like, do I need one? Is it mission critical? I mean, like, no, but I really quite like having them. So I'm gonna make sure that any replica I buy has the rail.
And especially as a beginner, right? Our big thing is always for beginners, like try as much stuff as possible. And if you're limited by your airsoft replica because you can't use a foregrip, you can't use an underslung grenade launcher if you want to go that route, you can't use an optic, right? Whatever it is, like that is limiting in a way that may impact your enjoyment, or it may force you down a road that you didn't really consider. But now, not only you're getting an optic, but now you're like, oh well, I got to pick up a rail, and I got this, got to do that the other thing. And I mean, more power to you. But I think it's important for especially for beginners to consider that when they're looking at their purchase. Like, what are you going to do with this replica in the future?
And like, there's a lot of value for a beginner, I think, in picking up a platform that gives them as much flexibility in terms of future external and internal modification as possible. Or alternately trying to get something on the like very cheap side so that you can be like, try that and then figure out what you want from there.
Both that's a great point too. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, second question. This question just says Joule and 4 question marks. Presumably, I'm going to take this as, what the hell is a Joule?
Seems reasonable.
So for those of you who are listening, or I mean, if you're watching too, here when I say Joule, I'm saying Joule, right? Joule. Joule is
measure of energy.
Yeah, transfer. It is a measure of energy, right? So when we talk about joules in airsoft, really the context of that is for us measuring the output power, output energy of our replicas. When we first started playing airsoft, measuring the output of your airsoft replica wasn't a thing. But regardless, once we got out of the Stone Age and started,
the bad old days when the most efficient test, like the common test, was like, well, did it hurt too much? And like, I remember when I started playing, and like no one here had a chronograph, and basically no one who played airsoft in Canada, I think at the time, had a chronograph. It was like, oh yeah, if you get a Coke can and it'll shoot through like this much of the Coke can, like if it'll shoot through the sides or the top and the bottom, it's in this range. And it was sort of like, if it shoots through the top and the bottom, it's probably shooting too hard.
Yeah. And at the time, like, we really measured our output by velocity, right? Feet per second. Yep. Or meters per second, but like, we're in Canada and we use metric, except when we don't, and feet per second is one of those times. So we used feet per second, and I think a lot of I think a lot of the airsoft community, at least in North America, were using feet per second for a really long time. And there was a transition. I can't put my finger on it, but I would say probably around 2016, 2017, maybe, to move away from using feet per second as a measure of energy and move towards joules. Well, feet per second, not as a measure of energy, but a measure of safety, and then towards joules. And the reason is because your energy, your velocity, your feet per second that you shoot is greatly impacted by the type of ammunition that you're carrying. So if you are using like a 3.2 gram BB, then your velocity is going to be lower than if you're using a 0.20. And so at the fields, we often would say, well, the field has a 550 FPS limit with 2 zeros. So then you'd show up with your 3.2s and you'd shoot that, and then you'd have to do the math to figure out, like, oh, well, what would that be if I was shooting 0.20 and blah, blah, blah. And it was just a bit,
lots of kind people have provided a nice table you can Google for it.
Yeah. But it was easier then to basically just use the measure of energy, because with the joules, if you are told what the weight of the ammunition that is being shot is, then when you run it through a chronograph, it automatically just tells you how many joules that is. And we also know scientifically what roughly is the amount of joules required for a BB to break skin that is uncovered, and it's around 1 joule, somewhere around that range, or at least it was in the last study that I read about it. So it's around 1 joule. Let's just go with that. So what that means is then we can then say, okay, well, based on that, what do we feel, right, is a safe amount of energy output for these replicas, depending on, is it a bolt action, is it a DMR, is there a standoff, so like your minimum engagement distance, etc. And once you set that, the only thing you need to ask a player is, hey, what kind of ammunition are you shooting? And if they go 0.3s, they shoot a couple of shots and you see that it's like 1.4 joules, you're like, great, you're under whatever limit that we've set. If they say, oh, I'm shooting 0.4s, well, and they shoot it and it's like 2.5, you're like, whoa, that's a little hot, you need to rein that back, whatever. But it just makes it a lot easier and cleaner and more reliable for fields to chronograph people's guns. Now, I know as well, like there's like Joule creep and a bunch of stuff like that. But for the like average airsofter who's showing up, especially at our field in particular, where we don't have these like high-powered airsoft replicas showing up, in generally speaking, and when they do, we know who those people are. It's really just the easiest, most effective way for us to get through that, right?
It's very manageable. And like, it's also pretty commonly used as a measure for most fields in North America at this point. Like, it's a very common value. I'll be honest with you, I still have to like look stuff up. I memorized the FPS table 100 years ago, and my brain is still like, this is the data you want. I'm like, it isn't, but it'll do.
Yeah, but it also makes it really just that much easier for you as well, because if you're messing around with your stuff at home, and you're shooting 3.2s and the field limit is 1.6, and you show up and you're shooting 1.58, it doesn't matter what the FPS is, you're good, and you can just move on.
Like it's right? it I mean, it even makes my life easier in terms of like the chronograph and stuff. I just every now and then I'm like, what does that convert to?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what a joule is. If if you're listening to this and your field doesn't use joules as a unit of measure for replica safety and stuff like that, I highly encourage you to talk to the field marshals to switch to it. You may find that it's more effective, and it just provides a better baseline. I mean, can you get in a situation where people are lying about the kind of ammunition that they're using? I mean, sure, but that doesn't change if they're using.
That was true before, right? Like if
exactly.
if I show up with 0.25s and we're using FPS, and I tell you I'm using 0.2s, and we measure it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's great, you're super low, carry on.
Yeah, exactly.
So like this isn't a thing that encourages or prevents cheating in either direction, in my view.
Yeah, so that's joules for you. The next question, and I'm modifying this question a little bit because I think that we want to have a bit more broad conversation about this one. Are there no upgrade parts for my blank, fill in the blank replica, right? Are there no upgrade parts for my TM FAMAS? Are there no upgrade parts for my G&G SCAR? This is a question that, I mean, we've dealt with over the years, using all kinds of different replicas, and then trying to, wanting to either upgrade them or trying to find the OEM part because something broke, right? OEM being like the original manufacturing part, right? And it comes up, pretty frequently in our Discord conversations, as well as, in the comments on YouTube. So yeah. And I know, Pat, you've gone through significant lengths to find certain parts for certain more obscure replicas. And be
For
curious to
sure.
hear you talk about that a
So,
bit.
um, people who've watched a lot of our stuff will have heard me say a whole bunch and have heard Phil agree with me, and I think largely because of my experiences, that you should probably think about this in the context of, so what's my like favorite thing that is relatively regularly available in common? We tend to encourage people to go for M4s. We tend to encourage people to go for AKs because you can get parts for them. So to give you an idea of some of the stuff I've had to deal with, so the latch that locks the stock closed, so the stock in its straight back position on my G&G Scar, broke back in the day. And at the time, most manufacturers and like retailers in Asia weren't taking orders from North America. And so I literally had to like email manufacturers in like Taiwan, and email parts places, and they didn't ever get back to me really until a fellow who was selling replicas in Canada. I was talking to him about other parts for other stuff, and I was like, by the way, do you have any idea how I could get one of these? And he was like, oh, I'm doing an order to, I think it was WGC Shop at the time. And I was like, oh man, I know they sell these, but like they also never ever answer my emails. He's like, well, they probably don't have enough English. I speak to them in Chinese. I'm like, that would be a thing for sure. So he talked to them and they just threw one into the order. But it took me like 8 months to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Not 8 months travel time, like 8 months of trying, and then just randomly, oh, cool.
Yeah.
We owned a pair of KWA USPs. One of them needed the hopup rubber replaced, the hopup bucking. That took also at the time like a year. And we realized when we were taking them apart to put hopup buckings in that also one of them was missing the ball bearing that serves as the nub for the hopup in it. Getting one of those was also really hard. So like, the more odd your replica is, the harder it's going to be to get parts for, right? I know a guy whose PPSH broke like 7 or 8 years ago, and he was like, "Hey Pat, can you get parts to fix this?" And I tried, and the answer was ultimately no.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
I think it's
and
also
like,
worth mentioning that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and like internally, that thing takes AK parts. Like, it's just a matter of, it's like, can you get a hop up to fix the hop up for this? Sure, buy a new gun. No one will
Yeah.
sell me one. Like, I can't reach out to the manufacturer, and no one makes one.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge too is that, like, especially if you're also dealing with manufacturers that are not that are maybe up and coming, or they're it's their first time, first kick at the cat, and they're trying to design something that's different, so they're not necessarily cloning something that existed before, and they end up making proprietary parts, um and then they end up not making that replica again because it doesn't perform, like, it doesn't do very well in terms of sales. Or like, you know what, we're not gonna do another edition of that. But you are one of the unlucky ones, or lucky ones, I guess, that ends up with this collector's item. Well, great, except that if you're trying to find an OEM part for that, you're probably not going to
I
be able to
mean,
find one,
another
after a certain amount of years.
another really solid example there is like, uh, so several of our guys actually, when we started out, had just luck of when they got in, they could still buy PTS Masada airsoft guns,
Mm-hmm.
right? Really slick looking, nice replica, like it worked well. But it was one of those, like, stuff went wrong with them, and it was like, there are no parts. They stopped making these.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to get this working again, you basically need to go find someone selling one and buy a donor gun. And that's not affordable. I have, I ended up with 2 VFC Scar H, one SSH, one, the sniper one, and one shorty. And one of my friends has most of both of them. one of the bodies is actually just in the back of my basement, like the lower, because it won't come apart. Someone glued the bolt catch in, so it's just like it can't
One
be
piece
fixed.
forever.
Yeah, like I can cut the bolt catch out and but the cost to get a new bolt catch is so high that it's like, yeah, this isn't worth my while.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, ultimately, I'm pretty sure I just threw all the other parts at him so that he could have a long or short version at will, with a little bit of like undo a couple of screws kind of thing. But one of the benefits he has from that is he's got 2 hop-ups for it, because if the hop-up in that ever breaks, you're going to pay $80 getting a new one, and it's going to be
Yeah.
a stock one.
And that's one of the things that, especially if you're looking at more of those, like, rarer guns or more custom or whatever, like, if you can find parts, great, but typically you're going to be doing like a pretty unique order, and those parts are likely going to be more expensive. They might not be. You might be lucky and you're looking at a part that's like a $5 part, or they can just throw it in if you're able to, but like, you're likely going to have to go to some more specific retailers or connect with some of the people who you do know who are retailers. Like, I think about like Matt Kruger in Colorado with Big Red Airsoft, the person you were speaking to that got you connected with WGC Shop. Like, if you have those connections, then it's a lot less
Yeah. Well, I mean, like,
risky for you,
you look at
right?
last year, even, right? Not a particularly proprietary thing, but like I smooshed the wires on my LMG Polar Star, and
Mm-hmm.
Chaz was just like, "Oh yeah, I'll get some of those from." I'm pretty sure actually from Big
Matt
Red.
Kruger, yeah.
Yeah, from Matt
Yeah.
Kruger, and just mailed me a couple because he's a saint. But like getting them in Canada was like $40 for a wire.
Yeah.
Um,
And same thing, didn't you order like a 240 a rotary hop up for your M249 that was extremely expensive as well?
yeah. I mean, so um, the 249 stock hop ups are bad. Is just bottom line. And so there are actually several third-party ones available these days, which is super cool. The one I picked up was a like, I think they're made in Russia, like CNC'd out of aluminum, just to an actual manufacturing standard, unlike the one that comes with the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super duper nice. It made a huge difference by itself in terms of the performance of the replica. But yeah, like it was just I heard that they existed. I read about them. I went and tried to find one, and there was one in Canada. I don't mean one retailer selling them, although that was also the case. There was one retailer selling them, and they had one. I was like, oh, all right, give me.
Yeah.
So like the answer to the question, oh, can I get parts from our replica, is often going to be yes, probably. The older it is, the harder it's going to be. I think Phil mentioned that like the original question was like, hey, so I have a TM Glock 17 Mark 1. Can I get parts for it? And the answer is maybe.
Mm-hmm.
um, Probably the answer is you can get parts for it that fit the current Glock that also fit it, because not a huge amount of internal changes have occurred. Maybe. Now I'm saying that without having done the research. Do not go buy them and assume it will work. Check first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like Airsoft is in a position in North America currently where you can get a lot of parts for a lot of things very readily. But also, I literally could not get a replacement bolt catch, like bolt spring, for the Scorpion Evo. Like, I spent a year emailing places in Canada, outside of Canada. I got Phil to email a place in France because I was like, hey, you speak French. They'll actually maybe
Mm-hmm.
listen to that. And they never got back.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's like places in, like the place in France, I'm sure was like, yeah, we have one, but we're not going to deal with like shipping you a $2 part. I'm like, even if I'd be like, I'll pay €20, I don't care. Like, I just want the part. They're still going to be like, no. And fairly understandably. So, even in the last year, I've literally had things where I'm like, no, I just cannot replace this
Mm-hmm.
part. And like that spring is funny in that a third-party retailer makes a 3D printed block that you mount on the rail behind the charging handle to keep it from leaving the part of the gun that it's in. Like, it is such a recurring problem that there's a like $20 3D printed part that is commonly available so that you don't have to deal with the spring flying across the room every time you take the gun apart. But getting a replacement for the spring is a pain. It's irrelevant to me now in that I no longer have the Evo, but like,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
and like, it's just like, frankly, given how modular what the company that makes the thing has built it to be, you'd also think you'd be able to like buy the carbine front end and barrel because it literally just screws onto the version of the gun I have, like it or had. There's no reason for it to be a hard part to acquire other than the company's like, why would we bother? Or they haven't thought about selling it that way, whatever. But I couldn't. And like, if I could have, I probably would have kept the gun because the carbine kit would have made it the length I want. Cool, great, 10 out of 10. So yeah, this really does boil down to like, look into what you're buying before you buy it is a really good piece of advice. I think so, especially with like sidearms.
Like
Gas
gas blowbacks.
Yeah, gas
Yeah.
blowback pistols, like uh if you're going with VFC or Tokyo Marui, yes, you're going to be able to get parts for it. If it's, and I mean, I say that, but like literally I own one that you can't, right? The PX4, I'm like, I'm like, oh man, I should buy like a metal slide and like get the upgrade parts and like make this super nice. And I went and looked and it's like, oh, they stopped making those ages ago because this just didn't take off. Like,
Yeah.
it came out, people were like, oh, it's new, it's cool, it's different. Yeah, I love it. It also came out around the time that it had been in a couple of movies, so people were stoked about that. And now it's a very niche airsoft pistol. So like, I'm sure the metal slide still exists somewhere, and I could probably find it if I dug far enough through the internet.
Yeah.
But like the Canadian retailers that I know had it, 5 years ago, don't, and they're like, yeah, we can't get more.
Yeah.
Or
And that's the thing too. Like eventually airsoft manufacturers will stop making the thing and they'll start making parts because they don't make the thing anymore. I mean, we experienced this with our airsoft innovation tornado grenades. Like the company is defunct. They do not there is no stock anymore. Like they reach end of life. That's it, right? There's and I think for certain airsoft stuff, like you've got to consider that. But I want to come back to something that you said because I think it's important and it also ties into the next question, which is that when you're looking at an airsoft part, you can't just assume that, well, I've got a Glock Gen 1, this is a part for a Gen 2, it'll fit. You can't necessarily make that assumption. Now I say that not knowing whether that is true in particular about the Glock Gen 2, Gen 1, but that's not the purpose of this. You can't assume that it will work in the same way that you can't just look at a hop-up chamber for a VFC scar and say, oh, this will fit my GNG scar.
yeah,
You should not make that assumption because it will not.
specifically, they won't.
Yeah.
And so like, one of the things that I mean, we're really kind of past the point where my teammates check with me about buying replicas, because either they've reached the point where they are like John and are just insane,
Mhm.
and buy very cool but odd things because they want to buy an odd thing, or they're at the point where they just already know to look for it,
Yeah.
But like, if you're thinking about buying an airsoft replica, one of the first things you should do is go open Google and type into Google name of airsoft replica, manufacturer of airsoft replica, known issues,
Yeah.
and see what
Or
you
if you
get.
see people in your classifieds that are always selling the same replicas over and over, the same brand. I remember when I was looking back in the day, looking at a GBB rifle, everyone was selling the KJW PDW,
Yeah.
right? And that's because it was inexpensive, but also not very good. But regardless, I think the next question that I think is important, and relevant to this is, can any hop up rubber fit on any barrel? Right.
No.
And the reason I think this question is important is because I think it ties neatly into this sort of like idea of like thinking about what parts work and like doing a little bit of research and stuff like that. So,
And
can any hop up rubber fit on any barrel?
so, no. uh, so some hop-up rubbers are different dimensions than other hop-up rubbers. Not hugely, but so if you're looking at AEG hop-up rubbers, they mostly all are the same thing. I have to say AEG because GBB, GBBR, and bolt action all use different types of hop-up and mostly can't take an AEG hop-up rubber. In fact, there are hop-up units that you can put into bolt action rifles as an upgrade that allow you to put AEG hop-up rubbers and AEG barrels in. If a bolt action rifle or anything else really can take them and it's not an AEG, it will tell you that as a feature. People will advertise that because it makes it cheaper to operate and easier to get parts for. For the most part, yes, an AEG hop-up rubber is an AEG hop-up rubber is an AEG hop-up rubber. You might get ones that are like, oh, this doesn't actually fit super well in this particular hop-up unit. Usually, if you do the aforementioned known issue search, you get that information. So basically like to like here. My experience has been that GBB pistols tend to have their own specific one for the make of GBB pistol just to annoy you.
Yeah, my experience as well.
You know, so replacing that, modifying that, you're looking at getting, you know, at minimum a TM gas blowback one for a TM gas blowback, but like check, do your reading. You might need a specific TM one for something. For an AEG, mostly just, yeah, it'll go in, whatever.
Does that also apply to like those MR hop up, like the hop ups, that the rubbers that have like the
sort of pseudo R hops?
Yeah.
Yes. You know, so those you're adding in a thing where you need to think about like what shape the window in your barrel is. So like they'll often recommend like, oh, this goes best with this type of barrel. For those, you actually probably need to care. It's a nuisance otherwise. You know, or they just don't work right otherwise, which is the thing. But like the cost of like, if you're really trying to eke the performance out that's causing you to buy those, you probably either already have the barrel you need or you're probably looking at upgrading the barrel as well. So
yeah, and you probably know a little bit more about what you're,
you know, hopefully,
yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, like there are lots of people who are like, yeah, I'm just going to try this, and more power to you. That's how you get good at teching. That's how you figure out how to do the thing. But
and at least a hop-up rubber is not a very expensive mistake if it doesn't work for whatever
totally
reason.
You know, but like at the moment, you know, at least in Canada, it's sort of like that would be a $36 mistake because it's $16 shipping and the $20 hop-up rubber. So like if you're going to buy one of those and you're not going to do your reading about it, also buy a regular nicer one so that you can put in whichever one works.
Fair enough.
You know, or actually do your research. That will save you $20.
Plus shipping.
Well, I mean, you're going to pay the shipping either way if you're
That's
getting
true, yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Just
next one, not a question, but Pat, you know you can HPA tap a cowboy revolver, right?
I do know that. But it sort of defeats the purpose of the cowboy revolver for me. Which is like there are not a lot of places where I'm an aesthetics over functionality person for airsoft stuff, but I think the like my great affection for or for the idea of anyway owning a bunch of like cowboy stuff is probably an aesthetic thing.
Yeah, being able to hold it out, right?
Yeah, like I want to be able to, you know, like, I mean, if I HPA tap it, I can't like spin it, right? Like it's all
That's
about
true.
doing silly stuff there. Because I mean, if I was buying it for practicality, I'd be buying something. I mean, in fairness, if I'm buying a sidearm for practicality, A, I'm buying a sidearm, so there's some questions, and B, I'm probably just gonna go buy a Marui High Kappa, or like some other analogous thing.
AAP1.
Oh my
and just tap and then HPA tap that.
Yeah, I guess if I'm going for the most practical airsoft pistol I can carry, then like there's an argument for that. But they're so ugly.
I just thought this was a really funny comment, and like, I mean, yeah, I get your point about the revolver. What about like a lever action rifle?
No,
you can do that.
That I'd absolutely HPA tap. Like, you know, I still feel like it ends up with too many problems in terms of like practical application for airsoft to be a really good idea. But you'd have a lot easier time convincing me to HPA tap a lever action rifle, and probably just then like run it as a sniper rifle.
That would be so funny. Yeah, maybe put that in the airsoft budget
You
for
know,
this year. Maybe next year. How
but
about that? Next year.
that's that's definitely like the um after we finish recording this episode, I will go check the retailer I prefer and see if they have brought in any more cowboy pistols, because they do every now and then bring them in at a reasonable price.
If you just surprise me with one of those at a game one time, I can't help. I'm gonna groan so much.
Oh, I know
It's gonna be cool, but like,
well, like
oh my god.
I mean, I'm not saying that like the fact that it will annoy you is a feature, but it kind of is.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but like it's also one of those things where because it's just like this is an aesthetic thing that I think is cool, that like empirically is not a good idea, other than because it's rad. It's also a like I want, um it's been pretty easy for the last few years to get a like chrome silver like sheriff star one, but I feel like it's a little too like it's a little lame. So like I want there are specific things I'm looking for in my daft cowboy revolver for Airsoft, which does not make this better, I'm sure.
Nope.
But I mean, I guess it might make it better for Phil in that it like has prevented me from buying one.
I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah, you got to take the good with the bad, I suppose.
But yeah, it's definitely the HPA tapping. That is definitely, I don't know. I'm not quite willing to say like a bridge too far, but probably not something I do other than for sheer silliness. My like I think I've said this before in like the last couple of episodes, but my airsoft budget for this year is mostly going to be getting some like better camo, and like getting some real stuff, because it wears better and looks better and functions better. If I end up towards the end of the season with like money in my airsoft budget a second time, I'm not sure what dumb thing I will buy. It sort of depends on like what dumb things are available and what tickles my silly fancy at the time.
All right. Next, this one's an actual question. What is an easy way to make my games more interesting without having to buy or build an expensive prop?
Man, like based on last year, buy a football. Like,
yeah, yeah. I think we tried several new game modes last year. We also changed a couple of things in like the event that we did at the end of the year. So we got some new stuff planned for the next event. I think it's different if you're playing just like a random skirmish versus if you're trying to organize a bigger game. I think in a bigger game, like there's ways that you can make the game more engaging and more complex without having to use props. Like we did props at our game, and I'm not necessarily sure if that made it. I think it made it cooler, but I mean, I don't necessarily know if the players felt the same way. We didn't necessarily get that in the feedback.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I think the answer there is we think props are rad, so we're going to talk about them a bunch. But also that if you don't agree with us, or if you are going, well, my budget is shoestrings, so I can't do that, there are lots of ways to make your gameplay more interesting, or more varied and more fun, by spending very, very little money, or
no money at all. I think one of the key things that you can do to make your games more interesting without spending any money right out of the gate is to change whatever the mechanic is. Obviously going to be harder to do on like a team deathmatch game, but change the mechanic from a typical like deathmatch with a set number of lives to a time limit with unlimited lives right out the gate. That changes the dynamic of the game a whole lot more, because people don't die in the same way and stay out of the game. So that rewards players for being super aggressive and being able to keep the tempo up and whatever they're going to do. And in almost all of the game modes that we tried last year, I think almost all the game modes, anyways, most of them, let's say, we had unlimited lives. So we played the football game. It was like unlimited respawns until the 20 minutes were up. When we did the Chiron game, which we called Ascension, I think, or whatever, like that that was unlimited lives as well. Like it's just as long as it takes for and then 20 minutes or what have you. And then we did like a hide and seek one. That one might have had unlimited lives too. I can't remember.
And-
But like we tried a bunch of different stuff, and I think giving people an objective to accomplish is more engaging in a lot of ways than just hunt all the other players, right?
I think for us, a large part of it really comes down to we have played a ton of team deathmatch, and if you're in a position where that feels like a thing you want to do not all of the time, or even only some of the time, or rarely, you're in a place that I think Phil and I probably agree with you. And so it's pretty doable to modify that to serve, a different game mode or a different approach to gameplay.
Yeah, and to be honest, like if you have a game that has a win condition, which is, capture the scientist, bring him back to the village, or kill all the other players, well then really like it's just a death match with an extra step. If you want to do that, it's likely going to be easier for you to eliminate the other team than to accomplish whatever this cool guy operator hardcore mission they put in front of you, because the other players are going to be trying to kill you too. So you just tag them out and then you win.
They will put themselves in the way of the objective for you.
Yeah, and we've encountered that many, many times when trying to organize games with objectives and things to do. It's that if you have limited lives, then the objective kind of doesn't matter. It's just bottleneck the other team and schwack them all, and then you win, regardless of the prop or the scientist or the whatever.
It turns out the objective can often be accomplished by killing the team and then walking to the objective and doing it.
Yeah. I would also say one of the ways that I think we tried to make the events that we had more interesting, and this is something that I would absolutely encourage people to think about, is the idea that there are many ways to win. There's not just one path, which is collect all the victory points and win the game, or control all the field and win the game. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but you can also do other things that the teams can actually do concurrently without necessarily jeopardizing their ability to win. And I think that's super, super important, because if the only thing that matters at the end of the day is victory points, and there's only one way to earn victory points, and that's control the field, then control the field is the only objective. That's really the only thing that matters, right?
And like the wider the range the objectives you have, and the wider the more diverse the ways of accomplishing there are, the more interesting that usually becomes. And sometimes you'll trip up and you'll go, oh man, I've accidentally created an objective that can be accomplished without functionally playing a game of Airsoft, where both teams are like, oh yeah, we can just go do the thing and not fight. And if that happens, it needs revision. But almost all of the time, people will, like, if one team doesn't have to engage in direct conflict in order to achieve their objective, often the other team, as long as they know that they need to, will go and interdict them and make their lives harder. Even if it's just like, oh, hey, we need to stall them while we do our thing.
When we did the first Operation Last Refuge last year, wasn't the first one, but like I guess the Redux,
the first one of the year.
Yeah, like one of the objectives that could get you to win the game is control the field for basically 80% of the day, right? And what that meant was that the other team could not score more than like 3 points or something throughout the day. And if you did that, you won outright. But that's super, super hard to do, because it basically means that you had to keep the other team penned in on their side for all of the day, which was basically impossible to accomplish. But if you organize yourself and that's the objective you want to go for, then you win outright. So that's great. But then if that's one of the things that the team wants to engage and try and do, then maybe they have to say, well, if we don't win outright, well, at least we'll get a lot of points and it'll put us in a good position. But meanwhile, maybe the other team doesn't care and they let you pen them for just long enough so that they can get the points so you can get the victory. But then they're spending all of their resources trying to find the parts of the puzzle that Pat created, so that they can work with the scientists and get them the code and do that thing so they can get the scientific victory to the game, which, spoiler alert, none of them even picked up on. But that's beside the point.
And
right?
I mean, in some ways, and we've talked about this before, that comes down to like, okay, maybe we built too complicated a mousetrap.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's something for people to consider as well, like when they're thinking about making their games more interesting or making their events more interesting. Like adding complexity for complexity's sake doesn't necessarily make it more engaging. In some cases, it can be more frustrating. In some cases, it can be just more head scratchy. Some players just might not get it, which is sort of one of the things we experienced. So there's definitely a balance to be struck, but like none of the things we've actually talked about just now really involve props in any way. We're only talking about how the game is designed and how that thoughtfulness of that design helps or hinders the players
And
at finding things that they want to do throughout the day.
and like we've said this before, but it can genuinely be as simple as, hey, we decided to just flip the field, so 90 degrees, so just to play on laterally
Yeah.
instead of like vertically instead of horizontally across the field.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to do a ton of work to make airsoft games feel very different than they normally do. Even just the team death matches that we play at Frontline on the regular, if you change the starting points, the game becomes a different game.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So, I think there's two, like we've talked about this before, but like there's a misconception, I guess, that oh well, in order to make games more interesting, you need all these cool props. You see content creators and stuff making all these awesome, like really cool bomb props and stuff, and you're like, oh well, if I want to make my games more interesting, I need that kind of stuff. And like, really, you like it'd be cool to have a prop like that, and maybe it helps with immersion. But fundamentally, like you can replicate a lot of that with just junk,
And
right?
and
Like
and
crates, hula hoops, like whatever.
and we've been like straight up wanting to build a cool bomb prop or I've been for ages. Still haven't really done it, honestly, because my motivation to do it to modify our like regularly scheduled gameplay was like, or we can just use a box and say there's a bomb inside. Yep.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, or it's this is an EMP device. Is it a Black Warhammer box? Yes, just like every other prop. But you know what? That's fine. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I
If you're
think,
looking for
think
a good prop, a black plastic briefcase is not necessarily super expensive, and we have gotten a lot of mileage out of it.
yeah, I just tape different color tape on it to do different things, or you write stuff on it using tape, and you're off to the races. So there's a lot you can do with very little, with household stuff, as well. If you are looking to build some sort of prop, but fundamentally, like you really don't need them. Like there's like Pat was saying, you can flip the orientation of the field. You can change the starting points. You can introduce like unlimited lives versus limited, etc. All of those things can make your games more interesting, more engaging without having to spend a single dollar. So just something to consider.
Sure.
All right, two more questions. One, how many BBs do you think you've shot in your time playing airsoft?
I am
How would you even go about answering this question?
an English teacher. I can't count that high.
That easy. All right.
I mean, like I can ballpark the amount of BBs I shoot a season.
Okay.
At like the, average 6,000 kind of range. So 2007 to today times 6,000.
So 2007 to today is 14 years,
Yeah.
right?
So
Times 6,000. What is that? That's 84,000.
yeah. So
84,000.
ballpark. I have shot 84,000 BBs. I have probably actually shot more than that because there have been some seasons where I've shot more. There have probably also been a couple seasons where I've shot less. But like
2020.
yeah, right. And that also discounts the 20,000 BB box of BBs I got to put in my tornado grenades in 2008 from Walmart for like $8. They're not good BBs. Don't put them in an airsoft gun.
Yeah.
Those are also gone. And I think I like gave Phil half of them, so I know you can divide that 10,000 rounds or 20,000 rounds between the two of us. The couple of seasons where I ran a grenade launcher, I definitely shot substantially more because I guarantee you I did not go home with BBs in my grenades, whether the grenades got used in a game or not. Like,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
that was like an extra 600 every time I played. Just like, no, these are getting shot. I don't care. Like, if I don't use it
How many
during a
people got
game,
shot right in the plate carrier at the end of the day,
right?
right?
Like, I
Like,
mean,
yeah.
just for fun, right? So, um, yeah, like the kit I'm carrying definitely has an impact there. Like, I definitely shot more last season just because I had an LMG that worked for
Hmm.
two of the games. For those two games, I definitely shot at least 2,000 BBs out of the LMG both games. That box mag also is not coming home full.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say probably I would say I'm probably higher than that. I mean, yeah, okay, I've been playing an extra year. Ooh, spooky. But like I think overall I shot substantially more than you did just on average every season. So,
I'd agree.
number 1, I would tend to say that I've played more per season than you did. Not like twice as much, surely, but yeah, definitely a couple of games.
Totally. I'm like,
And I shoot roughly a million BBs every time I play, which is to say, well, not a million, surely, but I would say go through 8 to 10,000 BBs a season, probably maybe even 12,000 some years.
yep,
Um,
I definitely would buy that. And like, I mean, there have also been
yeah.
seasons where like, um, just because of the nature of the games we were playing, like, you know, there were a bunch of games where like you would use my spare mags because that was the
Hmm.
nature of the game. And it was like,
Yeah.
like Phil is up front, he's shooting a lot. I'm taking, more like DMRE shots further back. I don't need to burn through all 10 mags that I'm carrying. Phil's like, hey, I've been shooting a lot. Can I steal 4 or 5 of your mags? Yes, absolutely. I want to win the game. Carry on, right?
Yeah.
You know,
And I remember actually, now that I think about it, like when my G&G Veltor wasn't working, or G&P Veltor wasn't working very well, and also when my G&P Mots that I tried to get working, all this kind of stuff, when they weren't working well, I was shooting at least 2,000 BBs per game because I was shooting so much just to make up for the fact that they were Garbo, in terms of like accuracy, like effective accuracy and
yes,
all this
not
kind of
doing what
stuff.
it wasn't doing what you wanted it
Yeah.
to. So you were compensating by just weight of fire, which, spoiler,
I mean,
works.
yeah, it is a thing. But it's more expensive,
Yeah,
obviously.
it's
But if I look at, for
oddly, it may
example,
actually
last
be
year,
slightly cheaper to run a good working gun.
yeah, well, I mean, last year is a good example of that. Like, I bought 3 6s, and I also shooting like 3 0s, moving up to 3 2s. I don't know how many bags I went through last year, but it was not that many, and because I'm shooting substantially less, because I don't have to
Yeah,
shoot
I
as
mean, the
much.
closer we get to one trigger pull, one hit, you know,
Yeah,
which is kind of
the cheaper it
which
gets.
is kind of
Yeah,
the tech goal. Not that it's really actually probably closer to like 2 or 3 trigger pulls, but like 2 or 3 is a lot better than 10.
yeah. So I think for me, like I'm probably in the hundreds of thousands for sure. Um, Not millions, I don't think so, but definitely hundreds of thousands, definitely. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question, though,
Yeah,
and
no,
just a good way to think about it, right?
and
Like how many bags do I go through per season, and how many seasons have I played? That's simple.
it's also
Yeah,
definitely one of those like things that makes me feel good about using bio ammo,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah. All right, last question. Have you ever had an instance while playing Airsoft where you felt like you were in an action movie, or like a really cool guy like moment?
yes.
Yeah.
I
What
mean,
would that be for you?
um, so definitely like top moments of my airsoft career in terms of like feeling like a badass. Insofar as that applies to me in anything, um, was just like I was still using. I would be using the PX4 for the first, like, maybe even the first time. But we were playing a large area game up at Redcliffe, and we're like just like off the trail area and taking fire. And my primary was the M16, and it stopped working. It dropped a motor lead in the middle of play, and I just transitioned really seamlessly to my sidearm, shot the guy who was suppressing us, and we just continued on. And it was just like, yes, I feel
Yeah,
good. I have done the
yeah.
thing. uh,
I think for me, uh, definitely like the Stalingrad game that we did in 2013. That's when we met Chris and Miles and all of them. I distinctly remember there's a picture um, of me sort of back on on the bus, and I'm on the phone, on my radio phone or whatever, and I got my replica down, and like Chris is next to me, and I think Miles is on the other side, because they were like they I was the commander for that event, and so they were like my like protection or whatever. And like I remember just, and I didn't, I like, I mean, I felt cool, whatever, but I remember just how that whole thing felt. Like I was in this position, people were around us, they were pushing, they were holding the line, there was a lot of action going around, there was a lot of coordination that was happening. And I just felt like, wow, like the pieces right now are like everything is just falling into place. And even recently I was talking to Chris, we were out for a run, and he was saying, like that was the coolest he's ever felt playing airsoft. Like it just felt like, like we definitely felt cooler than we actually were. Like there's no question about that. But I think for me it was just this moment of like, wow, there's so much action coordination going on right now. And I felt like that, I think, several times since then, in smaller ways, but it's always been when we have been coordinating really well, playing very strong. Like one game that we played, which was like, 6 or 7 of us on like 20 something on the other team. And I remember at the start of that game saying to the team, like, yep, we're not going to win this. Let's just do the best that we can.
Yeah.
And we were so dialed that we actually did end up winning that game with very few casualties, because we were just so
it was
well
just
coordinated, well thought out.
everything worked exactly how we wanted it to and how we planned it. And like,
Yeah.
everything going how we plan it is not a common theme in
No,
our
certainly.
Like, just, oh, hey,
And like,
all of this went right. Okay.
And there's something like action movie, like cool guy to be said about like you're in cover, you're on the radio, people are talking to you on the radio, all the comms are good, like it's good information that's being relayed. People are saying something, someone else is taking action. Like there's a lot of like accuracy, brevity, clarity in the communications, but also there's a lot of urgency and action, and also just decisiveness. Like when all of that falls into place, you're just like, wow, shit is locked right now. This is awesome. And I'm very much hoping to experience that when we go to Iron Horse again.
For sure.
Because again, we're going to be 2 full squads of, experience to a certain degree, to varying degrees, I should say, of experienced players who are going to be coordinating fire and maneuver, like all this kind of stuff. It's going to be very, very, hopefully very like action movie, like cool guy sort of vibes. But it's never, I think, I don't know about you, like, I mean, you were talking about how you drew your pistol and like, you smoked that guy, you're like, yeah, like like for me, like those moments, like they're never, I don't know, they're not about me. For me, it's what's going on around me. Like what does that immersion feel
and
like?
Like, the thing there with that situation was, so I took the guy out without him taking any of my team out, and we can then continue and push on, right? It was just like, it was mostly a like, oh yeah, one shot, one kill with your brand new pistol feels pretty good for sure.
Yeah,
one shot, 100%. One kill with your
100%.
brand new pistol, and then your team wins the game because of it, because it allows you to push on and do the thing, right? Like, yeah. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, and I make no illusions that if I was like in an action movie, like I'd be the NPC, right? Like, like
totally,
no question.
For sure. But like, like I'm everyone who plays Airsoft has moments where they're like, I feel like a badass. I mean, that's kind of why we're here, right? That's why we're doing it. But yeah, for me, a lot of it's just like situations where, I have been able to perform whatever my role on the team was, which, for a long while has been, sort of like a DMR kind of thing. So like, smoking someone who's quite far away for Airsoft, and then having my team again be able to like push past what would have been an obstacle is a good feeling.
Yeah. Especially if you're communicating with people and you're like, yeah, took out the guy on your right, push up or whatever, and you're like, okay, this is cool, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're providing, you're almost providing that cool guy action hero immersion for the other player who's not the person who's on the receiving end of your BB, but the person who's on the receiving end of your assistance.
The person on the receiving end of the fire support likes it a whole lot. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One other really like solid moment there. Like there was a point where I was running the 203. I'm like, people will talk, like YouTubers especially will talk, and I guess we are that now, but like about like firing the 203 and getting a bunch of kills. That never happened. I ran it for 2
Mhm.
years and I got very few kills with it. But I remember one game where I fired it into the middle of a group of 10 people, like sprinting across to set up for a team deathmatch. And half of them kept running and the other half of them ran back to cover. And like, I don't think I might have hit 1 out of the 10 people with it, but I split the group of them in half and we chopped them to pieces because of it. Because the ones who went back never came forward, so we just mulched the first half and then mulched the second half because we had 10 guys on 5, and it was like,
Yeah.
yes, good.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, that worked. I'm into it.
Yeah. Well, guys, that's it for the questions this week. Thanks so much for always like submitting stuff, for asking questions either on the Discord, on the YouTube.
Absolutely. I mean,
like
we enjoy doing the Q&A. Like it's chill and it's usually a laugh.
And like we enjoy, like we'll always answer the questions up front, like on the in the comments or on the Discord. But it's cool to come back to it and answer them sort of in a conversation sort of way, because number one, like not everyone reads the comments and stuff, and that's fine. But B, like having one person answer a question is different than having a conversation about a particular topic, and often leads us down paths that maybe we hadn't considered before. So thank you so much for submitting questions and for being engaged. If you are looking to continue the conversation with us or ask some more questions, feel free to join the Discord. We have a super active Discord by virtue of the fact that we have people from all around the world. So the night shift is about to take over once Frosty gets home from work and decides to hop on before going to bed or whatever. And then the next morning, somebody else picks it up, and people in Europe are there throughout the day. Like, so there's always conversation going on. So if you're looking for assistance, you're looking for conversation about Airsoft, gear.
It's a great place to just be an Airsoft nerd and have a chat. I love it.
Yeah. So you're welcome to join us. The link is in the description. But until then, that's all we've got for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.